Alright, so now that we've had a basic introduction to how animations work, let's go ahead and close this. And I'll show you how to use animations from within a control template to add animation to your control. So go ahead and Alt-Tab into Visual Studio. And we'll be modifying the file playbutton.xaml. So if you don't have that open, go ahead and double-click to open. You can find it in the Resources folder. Now once you're in there, let's scroll down and take a look at the triggers in this control template. So if you take a look at the first trigger, you can see that this is a trigger which gets applied when the isMouseOver property becomes true. And when that happens, we find the object called highlight, and we change its opacity to 1. Or in other words, when isMouseOver becomes true, we want to show this object highlight. Now this object highlight has a radial gradient brush on it. And when it becomes visible, it creates a glow effect in the button. This is a great example of where you can use animation to make the transition much more subtle, and in that way make it feel a little bit more real. Now to use an animation, we want to replace the setter, so go ahead and comment that out. And because the syntax for an animation can be a little bit wordy, I've gone ahead and created the animation for you. I'll just walk through it with you to explain what's going on. You can find the animation in the file animation.txt, so go ahead and open that up, and then select all of the text in this file, and copy it, and then go back into playbutton.xaml, and we can paste that directly below the setter which we just commented out. A trigger gets applied when a certain condition is met, in this case when isMouseOver becomes true. And if we're using a setter, we can simply turn that off and on. In other words, we can set the opacity to 1 and then we can set it back to 0. And there's an obvious begin and an end to that. But if we're using an animation, it's a little more subtle. We actually need to define what happens when the property becomes true, and then we need to explain how to undo that action. So to address this, Trigger has a notion of enter actions and exit actions. And the most common action to use in either of these cases is the action begin storyboard. Begin storyboard is just a way to start a storyboard. And so you can see that we're using the complex property syntax to set the enter action and the exit action properties on this trigger. And that in each case, the first child is a begin storyboard followed by a storyboard. The result is that the storyboard under enter actions will begin when the condition becomes true, and then when the condition is no longer true, the storyboard under exit actions will begin. Now each of these storyboards just contain one animation, and it's a double animation. Double animation doesn't mean twice as good or that it's doing double of something. It just means that it's animating a property of type double. And if you're not familiar with doubles, double is a number type. The double part refers to double precision. So it's a very precise number, and this is the type associated with the opacity property. And that's important because if you look at this animation, you can see that we're animating the opacity property right here on the highlight object, which is specified right here by the storyboard.targetName property. We've set two other values on that animation. The first one is this, 2. This is the value that we want to animate to. In other words, we want to animate the opacity property on the highlight object to a value of 1. And then finally we have duration, and this is an indication that we want that to last 0.2 seconds. That goes hours, minutes, seconds, but we've specified the seconds as a decimal. We're doing something very similar for the exit animation. If you look at this animation, you can see that we're still animating the opacity property on the highlight object. This time though, it will take a little bit longer, and you also might have noticed that we haven't specified a 2 value. The reason for this is the trigger keeps track of the original value for us. So by leaving off 2, we're just animating back to whatever the original value was. Something else that is conspicuously missing from both of these is a from value. In neither case are we specifying the value that we want to begin animating from. By leaving this off, the animation will just pick up with whatever value is already there. The great thing about this is it allows us to have handoff between animations. In other words, if one animation is already animating the opacity property, this animation will just pick off where that one left off. So even if opacity was 0.5, because we hadn't completed a previous animation, the first animation would still animate that to 0, and then the second animation, the exit animation, would animate that back to whatever the default or the original value was, which in this case was 0. But the truth is it keeps you from thinking about most of the details, and you still get a very smooth animation that does a great job responding to human interaction. Let me show you what I mean. Let's go ahead and run the application so we can see it. Now watch what happens if I mouse over the play button. So now you can see that that highlight animates in for 0.2 seconds, which is really fast, and then it animates out over a period of 0.6 seconds, which is a little bit slower. So you can see that WPF has a rich offering of visual capabilities, and this gives you a big opportunity to exercise your creativity. Now this was just an introduction, but hopefully it serves as a launching point for your future creative endeavors with this extremely flexible platform.